At the beginning of every service, we light a flame in a chalice, a symbol of our faith. Our chalice lighting words today are by Odette Fulbright. This light we kindle is set in the lamp of our history. We inherit this free faith from the brave and gentle, fierce and outspoken hearts and minds that have come before us. Let us be worthy inheritors of this faith, and through our good works, pass it boldly to a new generation.
So welcome to the Unitarian Church of Lincoln on this Sunday morning. My name is the Reverend Oscar Sinclair. I'm joined in the chancel by our worship associate, Jamie Radcliffe, and we are joined this morning by the music of Dr. John Bailey and Bill Carpenter on the piano, and so many people that gather together to make these services possible every week. We gather on Sunday as a church to be together in community. Because, as we will say later in Joys and Sorrows, this world is too big and usually too hard to do on our own. So we gather, whether in person at 6300 A Street on the live stream where much of our congregation is joining us, watching on Tuesday night after a hard day of work. I can tell you that there are about 24 members of the congregation for whom that is how they experience Sunday morning. So, hi guys, sorry about your day. Our Sunday morning worship services, no matter how we experience them, are a chance to proclaim who we are and what we're about. Throwing open the doors of the congregation and proclaiming the love and welcome that is at the heart of this faith. This vision that we have that the Unitarian Church of Lincoln aspires to be a loving community, uniting reason and spiritual exploration to transform ourselves and the world. That is true. That has been true throughout the pandemic. It will be true for years to come. We do have a couple changes to our COVID protocol this week. We'll talk about this a lot more in the sermon, but very briefly at the start here. When we first published our COVID reentry guidelines, it was March of 2020. And since then, a lot of things have changed. Vaccination has gone from being a thing that some people have done to a thing that virtually all of the adult congregation has done, and children are starting to. The local health department has clarified their guidance on what they see as risky behaviors related to church or what they don't see as significant risk in church settings. And since March, we have a robust live streaming setup that we run every Sunday. What that means is that as of this week, we are going to default to keeping the building open, even if we are, as we are right now, in orange on the county risk dial, with cases increasing. Now, one of the ways that we will be able to do that is through collective action. And this is what the sermon is about, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here, but practically what that means is that going forward, we're going to continue to require masks in this building, and we're going to require that adult participants for in-person events at the Unitarian Church of Lincoln be vaccinated. We'll talk about that more in the sermon. But those are the big changes. There's also a lot of little changes that we did while we were editing the plan. So those are all available either in a video that was published on Wednesday on our website. They are also available in text form on our website, or by just asking any staff member or member of the reentry task force. We will tell you at length about our discussions and the results. the reason that we do all this is the same thing Mark Morrison Reed wrote 20 years ago now, that it is the central task of the religious community to unveil the bonds that bind each to all. There is a connectedness, he said, a relationship discovered amid the particulars of our own lives and the lives of others. Once felt, it inspires us to act for justice. It is the church that assures us that we are not struggling for justice on our own, but as members of a larger community. The religious community is essential, for alone our vision is too narrow to see all that must be done, and our strength too limited to do all that must be done. Together, our vision widens and our strength is renewed. So welcome to worship. Our opening hymn is number 1010 in the Teal hymnal, which will also be, unlike the memorial service yesterday, it will be above me. But the hymn is number 1010 in the Teal hymnal, We Give Thanks. We're going to do it twice through. Sorry, if you would please rise in body or in spirit.
Good morning. I have a crown and a bracelet made from my friend Aurora over here. What an honor when a child bestows you with jewelry. Our story today is called Stolen Words. She came home from school today, skipping and dancing, humming a song under her breath, clutching a dream catcher she had made from odds and ends, bits of string, plastic beads, and brightly colored feathers. Her glossy braids danced against her shoulders, swaying with her, black as a raven's wing. "Grandpa," she asked, clutching his hand, spinning under his arm before dropping it again, "how do you say grandfather in Cree?" He stopped breathing for a moment. A lifetime to a 7-year-old. He looked down at her sadly. "I don't remember," he answered. "I lost my words a long time ago." A frown clouded his face. "How do you lose words, Grandpa?" she asked. "They took them away," he answered. She thought for a moment. "Where did they take them?" she asked. "Where they took all of us," he said. "Away from home, away from laughter and soft words, away from our mothers who cried for us." She reached for his gnarled hand. "Who took you away, Grandpa?" she asked quietly. "Men and women dressed in black, talking to us with words we did not know," he answered. They reached home and sat on the stairs together. "Where did they take you, Grandpa?" she asked. Away to a school that was cold and lonely, where angry white faces raised their voices and their hands when we used our words, he answered. They took our words and locked them away, punished us until we forgot them, until we sounded like them. Harsh, sharp words, so different from the sound of our beautiful ones. She touched his weathered face, tried to wipe the sadness away with her soft hands. She looked down at her lap and handed him the dream catcher that she had made for her room. "You take this, Grandpa," she said. "Maybe it will help you find your words again." He smiled at her, his granddaughter, and touched her innocent face, a face that had never known hard words or raised hands. He smiled and kissed her head. The next day, she skipped out of school again, smiling widely at her grandfather. She stopped in front of him and took a deep breath. "Tan se, nemusum," she said. His eyes widened. She smiled brighter than the sun. "I found your words, Grandpa," she said. She pulled a tattered, well-worn paperback out of her book bag. "Introduction to Cree," it said. "My teacher helped me find this for you at the library." He reached for it, hands shaking, opened it, feeling the soft, much-loved pages under his fingers. "Nemusum," he whispered, "granddaughter." The word felt familiar in his mouth. It felt like his home, his mother. He turned the pages of the book carefully. Muse nu igen, book. He turned another, word after word. Pikiskwewin, language. His words, pages and pages and pages of them. He looked at his granddaughter, his Nemusum. "Thank you, Taniki," he said. "Will you read to me?" she asked, taking his hand in hers and leading him home. "Will you teach me your words?" His heart danced as he nodded, holding the book against his chest. And that is the end of our story.
Our next hymn is Building a New Way. If you would please rise in body or in spirit. There we go. Each week, as part of our service, we take up a collection to support the programs of this church and our partners in the world. And once a month, we set aside the collection specifically for a partner in the world. This is a Share the Plate Sunday, so in a moment I will step away from the microphone and we'll hear from our Share the Plate partner this month. As a reminder, all gifts as part of the Sunday offering will go to that partner organization rather than to this church. And I will get out of the way once this starts.
Well, hello, I'm here with Lindsay Turner, Program Services Director, and Lizeth Quandon, Volunteer Coordinator for Voices of Hope. Voices of Hope are the Share the Plate recipient for us for November of 2021, and we're happy to have you here with us.
Yeah, we're happy to be here.
Do you want to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit more about maybe how you got into the work and a little bit more about the mission of Voices of Hope?
Yeah, so I'm Lindsay Turner. I'm the Program Services Director. I've been here for just now 5 years.
I'm Lizette, I'm volunteer coordinator, and actually it's a recent change for me. I have been at Voices of Hope for 8 years, and throughout those 8 years, I've been the bilingual advocate. So I primarily have worked with clients who their primary language is Spanish. With that, I offer a Spanish support group, and within, I want to say 5 months, I've transitioned to volunteer coordinator. So that's kind of what my role is now.
Yeah, so our mission, it's really twofold. So Voices of Hope is a crisis center for domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, trafficking, and other forms of violence. So twofold, we do that 24-hour, 7 days a week crisis intervention through our crisis line that Lizeth mentioned. We also do 24-hour advocacy to the hospitals in town. And so that's with any sexual assault or domestic assault that comes in. And so that's part of our mission. And then the other part is really, we're really looking at changing that culture around violence against women and gender-based violence. And we do that with education and training, as well as it's important to form partnerships in our community. And so we're learning from, law enforcement or our legal partners and things like that, but they're also learning from us on how to do their work and be DV informed as well. And so that's our mission. The people who we serve are survivors, but also their families and their supports. And so a lot of times we get calls from parents or friends that say, hey, this is what's going on with my sister, and I just don't know how to help her. And so we will support them as well, walking through that with their loved one as well.
Well, I really appreciate your time today. I appreciate you being with us and telling us more about the work that you're doing. Thank you for everything that you do for the vulnerable in our communities, and for, doing everything you can to raise the bar with education pieces as well. It's really important work that you're doing.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
You bet. Take care.
A central part of our services together is the time we join as a community to mark the moments of our lives. We share with one another our joys, our sorrows, the events that mark our steps on the road. The threads of sorrow and those of joy are intertwined in the fabric of our lives, present for all, remembered by all. We share these threads, and they are woven together with those of others in our community. Our joys are shared and magnified. We are comforted in our sorrows. I invite you first to speak out loud or type into chat your name or the name of another you wish remembered in sorrow. Matt Eager, who died a week ago. Could you repeat that? Ryzen, Brazil. The Ryman family. The Donahoe family. We also have from Becky Saith in chat, my sister Ruth. And from Amy Miller, Emily. Now, please speak out loud or type into chat the name of one whose joy you would like to share.
Paul and I have been married for 55 years.
All of us married 55 years. Wonderful. We have a number of comments in the chat. Some of them are joys. I would like to we have Sharon Holtcrew recovering from a stroke. That's the joy is the recovering, the sorrow is the stroke. We have others that are sorrows that have come in slightly later. So the Bjorth literal family, concern for Wendy, and from Chelsea Krafka, sorrow, my nephew Abe, who is still in the NICU going on 9 weeks now. And we also have Dana. We have several comments about Joe Donahue. Earl Kramer said, Mary Summermeyer says, celebrating the life of Joe Donahue yesterday with her family and friends, and celebrating Earl's 81st birthday, which was yesterday. Thank you for your presence. Actually, while I'm here, our next hymn is hymn 1002, Comfort Me. Please rise in body or spirit.
It feels like there's more to do when we're live streaming to get set for a sermon. Stacy and I moved to New York City in 2014. I've told plenty of stories about the couple of years that I spent working at a church in Long Island, commuting from the Bronx, and the spiritual practice that was commuting on the Cross Bronx Expressway. It's an exercise in patience and the fallibility of human nature, we'll put it that way. But before all of those stories, I spent a semester at Union Theological Seminary in Harlem. And it's one of that 6-month period is pretty much the only time in my adult life where I've had the freedom to church hop for an extended period of time, going from UU Church to UU Church each Sunday, going from Manhattan, the East Side, to the West Side, to Brooklyn, to points north. But the church that I kept going back to, where I probably would have joined had I not started working for a church on Long Island, was Fourth Universalist, right on Central Park West. It's a storied church. It was founded as the Friends of the Final Restitution, an appropriate, if ominous, Universalist name. But for much of its history, it was the Church of the Divine Paternity, the Divine Pat, before the merger with the Unitarians made the Divine Paternity an awkward theological proposition for a name. So it became the Fourth Universalist Society of New York. There were 3 before it. It's the only one that exists now. It's a whole thing. It's like the first, 3rd, 5th bank or what. Anyway, other than its preference for long and memorable names, Fourth Universalist is also known for the mosaic above its altar. It's a mosaic of Jesus. That in itself is not that unusual for churches of its age. It's a 19th century building. But rather than a mosaic of the crucifixion or the Last Supper or any of the motifs that you often see above altars, it's this image of Jesus washing the feet of the disciples. In this very formal neo-Gothic space on Central Park West, known for many years as the Divine Paternity. The images of Jesus serving those he is in community with. In the Gospel of Luke, someone asks Jesus, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He said to him, "What is written in the law? What do you read there?" And the answer comes, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus says to this person, "You have given the right answer. Do this, and you shall live." And at Fourth Universalist, this storied Universalist congregation in Central Park West, the imagery is very, very clear. Loving our neighbor, Jesus washing the feet of his community, is the thing that enables and reflects the love of God. Love your neighbor as yourself. After 150 years of universalism in Lincoln and much simpler names, the form of that message has changed a little bit. Just as the Divine Paternity is now Fourth Universalist, we are quicker to talk now about interconnection and inherent worth than loving our neighbors as ourselves. But in some ways, it's still the essence of what we talk about every time we come together. We keep that underlying message of love and community, even as we've expanded the cast of characters that we talk about on Sunday morning. This week, excuse me, in the daily update videos that have been a little sporadic, we're still dealing with some stuff on my end, I've been taking up questions from our Soul Matters discussion prompts on the theme of holding history. The prompt that's been most on my mind that I meant to answer on Thursday and then delayed till Friday and now delayed to the sermon, the one that requires a longer answer than a 3-minute video, is this. When you tell the history of the pandemic 10 years from now, what story do you think you'll begin with? That question's been on my mind for any number of reasons. We're in the midst of celebrating our 150th anniversary as a congregation, so our gallery space right out there is a showcase of artifacts and stories through that 150-year history. And every time I walk through it, I'm reminded that for all the times that this congregation has collectively been through, from work on housing access to an old political cartoon from 1917 mocking Reverend Weatherly's work to negotiate peace in the First World War, it is obvious to me, every time I see that display, that the moment that we're going through now is going to be a chapter in whatever the next history presentation is. The 200th anniversary is going to have a section talking about these last 2 years as COVID-19 has spread across the world and through our community. And they have been times of tremendous change in this congregation. And from the first reflection I gave in this pulpit about COVID-19, it was clear that this was going to be a moment on par with a world war or major building renovation. Those are the same thing, right? So answering this question from Soul Matters is hard because it has been 2 years. And when I tell the story of the pandemic 10 years from now, where do I start? Do I start at the actual beginning, March 16th, 2020, shedding bitter tears in my office right down there in between our 2 services, where we announced that we were moving online for the foreseeable future? That happened. That's a place to start. It might be gathering at Antelope Park, summer 2021, seeing each other outdoors. Maybe it's the first time we saw the choir perform online. Maybe it's sitting down there trying to get the teleprompter to work for the 5th take of the first pre-recorded sermon that we did. Maybe it's staring at an orange wall in my home office. That moment when we first figured out how we could do this online thing, or the moment where it felt like it was all coming apart regardless of how well we managed the crisis. Maybe the moment of reading words from Reverend David Pyle this month, who described the last 2 years as 10 years of church adaptation in the last 2, where we have somehow made it work, but at an emotional, spiritual, and professional cost that is felt but difficult to name. But more than any single moment, I think where I would begin the story today is in the disconnect between the hopes of the early weeks of COVID and the reality of how the story evolved. So let me explain a little bit what I mean by hope there. So here's an excerpt from a sermon that I preached on April 5th, 2020. So the scene is, we have been out of our building this is the second or third Sunday that we were online. I was actually guest preaching in Omaha. Michelle, the interim in Omaha, was preaching here. I said this. There's 2 ways to tell the story of what's going on right now. The first is that we're all scared, that we are staying home because we don't want to get sick, and there's some truth to that story. But the other way to tell the story is this, that over the space of weeks, a country and a society that is often defined by our consumerism and our self-regard decided, all of us, all at once, that we would voluntarily stay home in order to buy time for our medical system, in order to care not for those who are young, healthy, and wealthy, but to care for those most at risk, the elderly, those with serious health conditions, those without the means to just wait for this whole thing to blow over. That is a remarkable thing. And for us, as Unitarian Universalists, I said in April of 2020, it is a moment where we are truly living our values. We preach that every life has meaning, that we are all interconnected. How true that is right now. I've preached that the church is the people, not the building, but I've never seen the truth of that quite as powerfully as the first week we moved out of the church building and I logged onto Zoom to lead worship on Thursday night and saw 50 beloved, dear faces looking out from a computer monitor, waving to each other. Do you remember that moment? There was a lot of fear when I preached that sermon. I had no idea what was about to happen. But there was also hope that this would be a moment where we as a society would come together in the face of a common challenge to respond collectively. It felt like a challenge, but also an opportunity for all of us to be our highest and best selves, both individually, collectively, and as a community. And so watching that opportunity slip away into polarized debates over public health measures, conspiracy theories about vaccinations, and just sheer fatigue has been a bitter, bitter pill. On March 11th of 2020, Lynn Ungar wrote, "Know that we are connected in ways that are terrifying and beautiful. You could hardly deny it now. Know that our lives are in one another's hands. Surely this has become clear." Watching that, the sentiment of that poem curdle, sometimes in real time, for me, is the defining memory of the last 2 years right now. Pandemics are collective action problems. I've said that plenty of times in the last 2 years, but collective action problems are a genre of philosophy. One of the first examples is this thought experiment. This is from David Hume in the early 18th century, who wrote, "Two neighbors may agree to drain a flooded meadow, which they possess in common, because it is easy for them to know each other's mind. And each must perceive that the immediate consequence of his failing in his part is the abandoning of the whole project. But it is very difficult, and indeed impossible, that 1,000 persons should agree to any such action. It being difficult for them in concert, so complicated a design, and still more trouble for them to execute it, while each seeks a pretext to free himself of the trouble and the expense, and would lay the whole burden on the others." This is the classic problem of collective action. If you have lots of people all responsible for little parts, it is really hard to actually get a task done. The problem of the pandemic is not actually that dissimilar from Hume's flooded meadow. Solving a pandemic requires a whole community agreeing to take action to drain a flooded meadow. And each individual has compelling reasons to avoid their individual contribution. If enough people act in their individual interests rather than their collective interests, the collective action that benefits the community and every individual does not happen. The prisoner's dilemma is a more refined version of the same philosophical problem. Social dilemmas in which all individuals would be better off cooperating, but fail to do so because of conflicting interest between individuals that discourage joint action. You don't have to go very far to get from this broad philosophical framework to where we are right now in our lives. So taken in the broadest possible terms. And these numbers are hugely oversimplified, but bear with me. Imagine that going about your life over the course of 2 years without wearing a mask or getting a vaccine carries with it a 0.1% chance of a significantly negative outcome, say death or a week-long hospitalization. 0.1%. 1 in 1,000. That is a low level of risk. I would love to claim that I have never impulsively done anything that had a 1 in 1,000 chance of me ending up in a hospital. But that's just not true. The collective problem in this case, though, is twofold, right? If each person makes a calculation that 1 in 1,000 is a worthwhile individual risk for 2 years of not wearing a mask and not getting a vaccination, that is an acceptable individual level of calculus. But it leaves 320 people dead in Lincoln, Nebraska. 2 years into the pandemic, thousands of people have been in the hospital. And the second part of the problem is that the pandemic continues. The meadow is not drained. Each month that enough people prioritize their individual interests over the collective interest, the risk of adverse events in every individual life also increases. The sad truth of the pandemic is that for the last 2 years, our state and our country have consistently failed the collective action problem. It's easy to fall into because it is easy to fall into what is best for us as individuals. Even our language around pandemic response reflects this focus. Masks are seen as an individual choice rather than a collective action on the part of a community. We talk about individual risk tolerance everywhere, every meeting I go to. But our individual choices are what determine whether Hume's flooded meadow is drained. And by and large, a group of people making choices based on their individual risk calculus do not lead to collective action. In the language of Scripture, rather than focusing on the commandment, love your neighbor as yourself, it feels like we focus on the framing question, what must I do? But the great commandment is not what must I do, it's love your neighbor as yourself. It does not need to be this way. The opportunity of the moment, way back in April of 2020, is to show that we are capable of responding to problems of collective action, that we can do that hard thing. The opportunity as Unitarian Universalists is to live in a way that makes manifest, concrete, tangible, the things that we talk about so often. Interconnection, mutual support, our responsibilities to each other and the community. Those aren't new things for Unitarian Universalists. We've been talking about them since it was the church of the Final restoration. There we go. So this week, we've made some changes to our COVID-19 measures as a congregation. And the headline change is that we're going to keep the church building open for in-person events, even while the risk of COVID-19 spread in the community is high. That's a big change. We're dropping the requirement that small groups keep 6 feet of separation. And while we're not yet restarting coffee hour on Sunday morning, we are letting small groups and rentals make their own decisions on food and drink moving forward. Those are significant changes since we published our first reentry plan back in March of 2021. And it is possible, because we know more now than we did then about what behavior carries what risk. It is also possible because most of our congregation is vaccinated, and because we are wearing masks while we are together. So the other piece that we introduced this week is important as well. Starting this week, vaccination is a requirement for adults participating in in-person services or events at the Unitarian Church of Lincoln. We're making allowances for medical exemptions and maintaining a robust live streaming option for anyone who needs to participate remotely, either because they've chosen not to get vaccinated or they are not yet ready to gather in large groups. But it will be a requirement. As you registered this morning, you saw a checkbox that said, by participating and registering for this event, I understand that the expectation is that I wear a mask in the building and that I be fully vaccinated. We're going to ask you to affirm that as part of being together in person, even as the transmission rates in the community are higher than they have been in the past. So requiring vaccines and face masks, although that part isn't new this week, might seem counterintuitive in a tradition that values autonomy as much as this one. But in a Unitarian Universalist congregation, as much as we value individuality, our treasured individualism is always, always, always in the context of community and interconnection. Part of this is implicit. If you look at national stats, the UUA reports that about 160,000 people in America are members of a Unitarian church. When you look at survey data of the number of people that identify as Unitarian Universalists in this country, the number is closer to 500,000. That is a statistic that has puzzled our membership professionals for years because, frankly, the Presbyterians do not have that problem. We'll take that up in a sermon another time. Because here's the point that I'm trying to make with this. For those 160,000, including the 300 or so in Lincoln, our individual Unitarian Universalism is in the context of community. That's what it means to be a member of a church. We have expectations of each other in this community. That is what allows us to be fully present with each other, to encourage each other to spiritual growth in our congregations. That is the central principle. And so COVID is a collective action problem for congregations, but it is also an opportunity to live into our implicit and explicit covenants that we have in our communities in more concrete ways than we have before. So take another example. Our covenant on the wall when you walk into the building says that we covenant to treat one another as we wish to be treated, with respect and regard for healthy boundaries. And it is only in the midst of this pandemic, as we have re-entered the building, that we've figured out this concrete step, right? Stickers on our name tags that correspond to our boundaries around space and touch. Green sticker, great. Hugs away. Red sticker, please respect my boundaries, and keep a 6-foot distance. Yellow sticker, there we go. Ask about it. These are right at the entryway. That's a COVID mitigation measure, but if we're honest, this is something that we could have done years ago to live into the covenant that we have with each other in this place. So these actions that we're asking of each other, stickers on name tags, masking, requiring vaccines, we could think of them in sort of the chilly philosophical terms of David Hume. One way to solve a collective action problem, to drain a flooded meadow, is to require contributions to collectively fix the meadow, require contributions from the whole community. This is the philosophical basis of most of public policy. But we could also think of them as an invitation, like the mural at the Divine Paternity, an invitation to live into our best, most interconnected selves, to make the covenants that we talk about into a lived experience of who we are and how we are in this community, a visible, tangible manifestation of our commitments to our neighbor and the highest. And if we do that, maybe the memory of the last 2 years isn't one of falling short. Blessed be, and amen. Our closing hymn is number 318 in the gray hymnal, We Would Be One. I also want to acknowledge a thing that is in the chat that was an earlier part of the sermon, but that sermon was running for 25 minutes, and so it got foreshortened on Friday night. That the other giant collective action right now in the world is climate change. That the COP26 conference that's been going on this week is a very, very tangible example of what it looks like to get David Hume's example in concrete terms of negotiations in 2021. So we will talk about that in the weeks and months to come, but I also want to make that connection explicit because we just talked about Hume 10 minutes ago. Anyway, hi everybody in the live stream. Thanks for bringing that up, and I am glad we could bring that back in. We go forth from this place, remembering that the ties that bind us do not just bind us here, that when we are out in the world on a Tuesday afternoon, we remain part of this community. It is good to be together. It is good to see each other. We will see each other again soon. For now, we will extinguish this chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of love, or the fire of commitment. These we carry with us until we are together again. Go in peace, beloveds, and amen.